Hey everybody, what's going on? And welcome to Guns N' Roses Central. And today I want to talk about a topic I've been meaning to get to, and that is the 1985 Hell Tour that Guns N' Roses did back many years ago, and it was pretty much the band's second gig. So we kind of have to go before the time that Slash and Steven Adler joined Guns N' Roses, and it was really the first incarnation of the band, which featured Axl Rose, featured Tracy Guns, it featured Duff McKagan, it featured Izzy Stradlin, and then it also featured Rob Gardner on drums. So at that time, Duff was working, a couple different jobs. He got laid off at one job, and then he found work as a delivery driver. And one day, while Duff was doing his rounds, he ran into Izzy, who basically told him about this new band he was kind of in. It was kind of like a combination of LA Guns, and it was a combination of Hollywood Rose. And, at that time, Duff really hadn't met Axl, but he said he had a crazy singer. That's what Izzy told Duff. And as it turned out, they just lost their bass player. And basically, Izzy told Duff, hey, don't you play bass? And in a way that things kind of happened from there. So Duff soon found himself in a rehearsal space with Guns N' Roses singer Axl Rose. And Duff recalled liking Axl right away, and he basically tuned straight into his restless energy. And as soon as he heard him rip into the mic, Duff knew that there was something special about Axl, and he knew that there was something different and powerful, and this dude was serious. So they played some shows, and although they were pretty good, Duff got the sense that Tracy Guns and Rob Gardner were pretty happy being big fish in a small pond, playing the same gigs over and over again around West Hollywood until something happened. And that wasn't the punk way as far as Duff knew it. He said in Seattle there really weren't any major label guys hovering at gigs, and you didn't want to wait for things to happen because they never did. So Duff basically pulled Axl and Izzy aside and suggested a road trip. He basically suggested we should do a string of dates along the West Coast and finish off in Seattle. It would be an adventure, he told them, and a way to find out if things were really going to fly away from the heady hothouse of LA. So Duff recalled, I could tell immediately that Izzy knew what I was up to. He said he knew this was the way to test the links in a band and find the weak ones. And they found them, and the weak ones were, of course, Tracy Guns and Rob Gardner. And Tracy and Rob would end up bailing out 10 days before the tour, and the band started to freak out a bit. Now, Duff felt by the plan to get in a car, drive to the show, and let the rest, the food, a place to sleep, gas, money, etc., that stuff will take care of itself. So these guys weren't really the best planners, but he felt around in his pocket for a phone number, and he called that guy Slash he had previously met. He basically told Axl and Izzy, don't worry, I know who we can bring in. So the key slid into the lock and turned, and Slash and Steven had 3 rehearsals with Axl, Izzy, and Duff, and they played a one-off show. It was their first show together as Guns N' Roses on June 6th at the bottom of the bill in the Troubadour, kind of like a warm-up show for this tour. And Guns N' Roses was ready to go on tour. They were also joined by a couple of friends, a guy named Danny and JoJo, whom they had listed as roadies for the trip. So the roadie Danny was supplying his car. He had a Buick LeSabre with a trailer on the back. Now, unfortunately, the car broke down 100 miles out of LA, and Danny and JoJo were delegated to stay behind with it. As the band would soon become the biggest in the world, they would hit the road with their thumbs out, and it was chaos. They missed all 3 gigs booked between LA and Seattle, but they somehow strung together enough rides to arrive triumphant, hungry, and reeking of high heaven at the Guerrilla Gardens for the first ever show outside of LA. Now, barely any people showed up. I think they had like 10 people showed up to this gig, but this time it didn't really matter. There was booze, dope, and Duff's punk friends to party with, and more importantly, they had finally made it to Seattle, and they made it together through a 1,000-mile odyssey of rides in trucks, sleeping at roadsides, starving. They were cold, they were tired, and they were looking, in Duff's excellent phrase, like hungry wolves. And they were a band at the end of the day. So the band played the gig, but when it came time to get paid, the promoter reneged on his promise of a $200 guarantee. And basically he told the band, you guys haven't sold any tickets. Now Axl got pretty infuriated, and he set light to some paper towels and tried to burn the place down. The bouncers chased them into the streets, and they ran screaming from the joy and adrenaline into another club where they attempted unsuccessfully to commandeer the equipment of the band playing there, which was a local outfit Duff knew called Soundgarden. Now, that attempt failed too, but when Duff's friend Donner organized a ride back to LA, they returned happy and, as Duff said, a genuine band. It was a gang with a shared experience of a road trip gone wrong, an out-of-town gig, and the knowledge that they were fully committed to Guns N' Roses. So why did Duff exactly think that Rob and Tracy weren't really cut out to stay in Guns N' Roses? So in his book, he said, part of my problem with the band when he first joined was that I was skeptical about the commitment of Tracy and Rob, who both had comfortable suburban lives in LA. I had already recognized the difference between people from LA and the people who moved there. Axl and Izzy were distinct even from other transplants. They were serious in a whole different way, and Axl sometimes slept on the street back then. It was also clear that Izzy would do whatever it took, heroin habit or not. You can come with us or not, they seemed to say, but we're not going to make our way and realize our dream. And basically, I like that. Still, I wasn't sure how best to express this to Axl, and I told him I just didn't think Rob and Tracy were cut out for going all in and sacrificing everything to work on their craft. And surprisingly, Axl didn't argue. We went inside. During rehearsal, I had an idea. I had been through the punk rock crucible. I was used to sleeping on floors and doing anything also necessary to get my band out there. In my experience, conditions like that also offered a chance to see your bandmates what they were really made of. And a shakeout cruise could just be what Guns N' Roses needed. I pulled aside Axl and Izzy. I said, listen, how would you guys like to play some places beside effing Dancing Waters in San Pedro? They nodded. If we're going to play for 3 people, I said, let's go do it in other places. F and A, said Izzy. I could tell immediately that Izzy understood what I was up to. He had been through this before, and he knew this was the way to test the links in the band and find the weak ones. In the first wave punk bands I played in, we booked our own gigs, we functioned as our own tour managers, and we handled our own dough, and we made our own concert t-shirts. The do-it-yourself ethic had been strong, and as a result, I knew the nuts and bolts of the business. With some songs mastered and these local gigs under our belts, I knew I could use the contacts I'd accumulated over the years to line up some shows along the West Coast. It would be a punk rock tour of the West Coast. And Duff thought, I think I can book us a tour, I said. It'll be bare bones, but we'll be out there playing. And they loved the idea. Yeah, let's do it, they said. I was excited now too, because by the end of this, we'd know whether GNR was the real deal or not, and punk rock tours in those days ran on pure adventure and adrenaline. You counted yourself lucky if you earned enough to pay for gas and still had something left over to buy ramen noodles. So we know that Rob and Tracy pulled out about 10 days before, and that was because they were skeptical about the idea from the start. As Duff said, I guess they weren't sure whether to take the leap of faith necessary to leave home with nothing but your bandmates and wits to depend on. And just a few weeks before we were to leave, they broke the news. They weren't up for a no-budget road trip. Not knowing where to sleep each night wasn't too much for them. And I assured them that we'd find places to crash. And anyways, what did it matter? We would be on tour, a concept that to me was pure magic. And it didn't matter. First Rob and then Tracy backed out. We had 10 days before we were scheduled to leave for the tour. And that's, of course, when they found Slash and Steven. So how did the guys get all the way from LA to Seattle if their car broke down? So the first time their car broke down when they were out there, they had to wait for about 6 hours until this old farmer guy dropped by and he was able to pick them up. And he drove them for a bit of a distance, but the problem was there was so much weight in the back and he was driving a super old truck and the wheel well kept scraping against the tire and eventually the truck broke down. So he had to drop the band off. They thanked the guy for giving him a ride and then they got picked up by another group of people, which were these hippie chicks who were high on acid. So the girls kind of freaked out the band members a bit, but they thought, okay, we got to get to Seattle. So they ended up jumping in the car with them, and they finally got to Seattle. Now, given the band's dire circumstances, they were, waiting on the road. They were starving. They didn't really have any money. So the only way they could actually feed themselves was to go into farmers' fields and steal onions and carrots and basically feed themselves that way. So once the band is done with their West Coast tour, they return to LA. They go to Cantor's Deli, and they take their first ever band photo shoot. They're taking the photo shoot to start putting up on flyers and stuff. And this is the infamous photo that you guys have probably seen in Mark Cantor's book. This was the first photo shoot that the band took. And you could tell just by the look in their faces that they were a force to be reckoned with after what they had gone through on this recent Hell tour. So that does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. And how epic do you think it would be to have seen Guns N' Roses play in Seattle, in that room of 6 people back in 1985? And I can't imagine what the thought on people's minds were when they saw this band and didn't know in a couple of years they'd be one of the biggest bands in the world. So thanks for watching, guys. Hit the like button. Be sure to subscribe. And be sure to check out my other YouTube channel, Rock and Roll True Stories. The link is down below. And as always, guys, go check us out at gnrcentral.com for the latest Guns N' Roses news. Take care.